They came for the car on a Tuesday, which I remember because Tuesdays were the days I ran the cold start on the old Sovereign, and the engine was still ticking as it cooled when the black estate cars swept into the mews, and I knew, before a single door opened, that someone had decided the late Queen's motorcar belonged to them now. My name is Idris Halloran, and for 11 years I was the senior of the household motor detail at Harrogate, which is a grand way of saying I was the man who kept the keys, the logs, and the standards of the royal garage, and who stood where the polished floor met the cobbled yard, and made sure that nothing on four wheels moved through those gates except by right. It is not a post that most people imagine when they think of a royal guard. There are no bearskins in a garage, but the oath is the same oath, and the discipline is the same discipline, and the day the Queen Consort's people rolled in to take the Sovereign, I found out exactly how much of it I had. The Sovereign was Queen Isolde's car. I should say that plainly at the start, because everything that followed turned on it, and because the woman herself would have wanted it said plainly. It was a long, dark, hand-built saloon, deep green under certain light and almost black under others, with a coach line the width of a coin painted by a man in the county who had painted coach lines for 40 years and whose hand did not shake. She had ordered it the year Prince Rowan was born. She had driven it herself, actually driven it, which royalty is not supposed to do and which she did anyway, out along the coast road on the mornings she could steal, with the window cracked and one glove off. When she died, the car did not die with her. It sat in Bay 4 under a fitted cover with her initials stitched at the corner, and I started it once a week so the seals would not go hard and the memory would not either. The estate cars stopped in a line across the yard. 4 of them, engines running, the way people park when they mean to be gone quickly and do not care whose morning they block. A man in a gray suit got out of the second one and stood looking at the garage doors as if he were pricing them. Then the door of the lead car opened and the Queen Consort herself stepped out, and I understood that this was not going to be a delivery or a service or any of the ordinary reasons a great household sends cars into a mews. Queen Consort Morwenna did not come to the garage. In 11 years she had never once come to the garage. She was a woman who arrived places already annoyed at how long the arriving had taken, tall, immaculate, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime being waited for. She crossed the cobbles in shoes that were wrong for cobbles and did not look down once, and behind her came the gray-suited man with a leather folder under his arm, and behind him, a younger man I knew by sight and disliked by reputation, Lord Cassius, her son, with the loose, confident walk of a person who has never in his life been told no by anyone who mattered. "You're the keeper," Morwenna said. Not a question. She had clearly been told my function and had not troubled to learn my name. "Sergeant Halloran, Your Majesty, senior of the motor detail." I came to attention on the line of the floor, gloves at my sides. "How may I serve you?" "You may open Bay 4. She said it lightly, already moving toward it as if the sentence and the act were the same thing. "My son is taking the green car this morning. The rest of his things will follow. See that it's fueled and ready." I did not move to open Bay 4. I want to be honest about the moment, because a great deal has been said since about what I did and did not do, and most of it makes me sound braver and quicker than I was. The truth is that for 2 or 3 seconds I simply stood there while my heart did something unpleasant, because I had run the possibility of this morning through my mind more than once in the 2 years since the Queen died, and now that it had come I felt the whole weight of it settle onto the small square of floor where I was standing. "The green car in Bay 4, I said, "is the late Queen Isolde's Sovereign, Your Majesty. It's held under the estate." "I'm aware of what it is." A flicker of impatience, the first of many. "It's a car sitting in a garage doing nothing, and my son needs a car. Open the bay." Lord Cassius had already wandered ahead of us to the fitted door of Bay 4 and put his palm flat on it, the way you might touch a horse you intended to own. "This the one?" he said over his shoulder. It's older than I thought, still vintage. He said the word as if he were doing the car a favor by wanting it. We'll want the chauffeur trim taken out. I drive myself. My lord, I said, I can't release that vehicle. The yard went quiet in the way yards do, when the men who work in them stop pretending not to listen. Behind me, in the shadow of the doors, I was aware of young Petrol, my second, going very still with a chamois in his hand, and of old de Vetch by the compressor pretending to read a gauge. Morwenna turned and looked at me fully for the first time, and I saw her recalculate, not whether she could take the car, that was never in doubt in her mind, but how much of a nuisance I was going to be about it. Can't, she repeated. You can't. Sergeant, I don't think you understand your position. I am the Queen. I have instructed you to prepare a car for my son. There is no can't. There is only how quickly you do it. I have thought a great deal since about the difference between a queen and the crown, and how a person can carry the first without ever once holding the second, and how the whole trouble of that Tuesday lived in exactly that gap. But I did not have the words for it yet, standing there. What I had was the log. With respect, Your Majesty, every vehicle in this garage is entered in the fleet register, and each one is held by a named authority. Some belong to the crown. Some are pool cars. Some are held under the estates of members of the family. The sovereign is estate-held. I'm not permitted to release an estate-held vehicle on a household instruction. It has to come through the estate, through the executors, with the transfer signed and the log endorsed. Until that's done, the car doesn't move. Not for me, not for anyone. The executors, Morwenna said, and now there was something colder under the impatience. The estate. My husband is the king. I am his wife. Do you imagine there is an estate in this house that stands above us? I imagine nothing, ma'am. I read the log. It was the wrong thing to say and the right thing to say at once. Wrong, because it landed on her like a small slap, and I saw her jaw set. Right, because it was true, and because in the 2 years I had lain awake over this exact morning. I read the log, was the only sentence I had ever been able to build that I was sure would still be standing when everyone else's had fallen down. The gray-suited man stepped forward then, opening his leather folder with the smoothness of a man who has been the reasonable voice in many rooms. Sergeant, I'm Idris Halloran, comptroller to Her Majesty's household. I think we can resolve this without theater. He drew out a single printed page and held it toward me. This is an authority, signed this morning, releasing the vehicle currently in Bay 4 into the custody of Lord Cassius. It carries Her Majesty's seal. You'll see it's quite in order. I did not take the page. I looked at it, I made a point of looking at the seal and the signature and the neat printed line describing the motor vehicle, dark green saloon, presently garaged, formerly of the late Queen. And then I looked at Kren. That's a household authority, Mr. Kren. It authorizes a household transfer, but the sovereign isn't a household vehicle. So an authority to move it that's signed by the household is signed by the wrong hand. It's like a man writing you a check on a bank where he keeps no money. The paper's very fine. There's just nothing behind it. Kren's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did, and I understood that he had known this. He had known it and had come anyway with the paper, betting that a garage sergeant would fold in front of a queen and a seal and a comptroller in a gray suit, and would not have the nerve, or, more to the point, the knowledge to say the word wrong hand out loud. You're refusing a written authority of the crown, he said, gently, giving me the chance to hear how it would sound in an inquiry. I'm refusing an authority that isn't of the crown, I said. There's a difference, and the log knows it even if the seal doesn't. If you'll come inside, I'll show you the entry, and you can see for yourself who holds the car. If the estate wants it moved, the estate can move it, and I'll fuel it and hand you the keys with my compliments. But I won't take a queen's word over a dead queen's title, because the dead one signed first. I heard young Petrol exhale behind me. I do not think he meant to. Morwenna had gone very quiet, and quiet in her was more dangerous than loud. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I could not entirely read, part fury, part something almost like curiosity, as though she were seeing a species of obstacle she had not encountered before and was deciding how it should be removed. "What is your name again?" she said. "Halloran, ma'am, Idris Halloran." "Halloran," she tried it out, filing it. "You've made a mistake this morning, Sergeant Halloran, and you'll come to understand what it is. I have been in this house 30 years. I know how it ends for men who imagine a logbook makes them larger than the family they serve." She turned to Cassius, who had drifted back to us and was watching the exchange with the faint amusement of a boy who has never once had to fight for a thing he wanted. "We'll do it properly, since the sergeant is so fond of properly. Kren, get the estate side handled, whatever it takes. And in the meantime," she looked back at me, and now she smiled, and it was a smile with a great deal of winter in it, "the car stays exactly where it is. Under lock, under seal. You will not start it, you will not move it, you will not so much as raise the cover. If it is the estate's, then it is not yours to touch either. Do we understand each other, keeper?" It was a clever move, and I felt the cleverness of it land. She had taken my own weapon and turned the edge around. If I would not release the car because it belonged to the estate, then by the same logic I had no business warming its engine on a Tuesday either. She was fencing the car off from me, sealing me out of the one bay I loved best, and daring me to complain. And if I did complain, I would be admitting that I wanted the car too, that this was not pure principle but a keeper's attachment to a dead woman's motor car, and she would have her wedge. "The sovereign will be held exactly as the estate requires, ma'am," I said. "It always has been. See that it is." She turned, and the whole gray machine of her turned with her, Kren folding his useless paper, Cassius giving the fitted door of Bay 4 one last proprietary pat, the estate car's engines rising as the drivers heard boots on cobbles. At the door of the lead car she paused, and without turning round she said, in a voice pitched for the whole yard to hear, "A car that no one drives is a waste, Sergeant. My husband's late wife has been dead 2 years. At some point the living have more claim than the dead. Remember that when you're deciding whose side the logbook is on." Then they were gone, 4 black cars sweeping back out through the gates, and the yard let out its held breath, and I stood on my line of floor with my gloves at my sides and my heart still doing its unpleasant thing, and I looked at the sealed door of Bay 4 and knew, with a certainty I could not have defended to anyone, that this was not over. It was barely begun. She would come back with better paper, and I had until then to make sure that when she did, the log was ready to meet it. Petrol came up beside me, the chamois twisted in his hands. He was 23 and good with an engine and entirely unprepared for the morning he had just watched. "Sergeant," he said low, "can she do that? Just take it. If the king says." "The king," I said, "hasn't said anything. That's the whole of it, lad. That woman spoke for 30 minutes and never once said the king had ordered a thing." I turned and looked at him. "Fetch me the fleet register, the paper one, the master, not the terminal, and the estate file for the late Queen's vehicles, the whole of it, and put the kettle on. We're going to read every line in this garage before that controller comes back, and when he comes, I want to know more about that car than the man who built it." He went. Duvech put down his gauge and looked at me across the compressor with the flat, weathered face of a man who had kept the royal cars since before I was born. "You know what you started," he said. "It was not a question either." "I know what she started," I said. "I only refused to finish it for her." He nodded slowly and went to help Petrol with the files, and I stood alone for a moment in the quiet of the garage with the tick of the cooling engine finally gone still, and I laid my white glove flat on the sealed door of Bay 4, once, the way you touch the shoulder of a friend, and I made the dead queen a promise I had no earthly right to be sure I could keep. Then I took my glove away, and I went to read the log. The Master Fleet Register of Harrogate is a book, an actual bound book. though there is a computer terminal that mirrors it, and everyone under 40 uses the terminal, and everyone over 40 trusts the book. It is the size of a paving stone, bound in green board gone gray at the corners, and every vehicle that has ever been kept at the mews has a page in it, and on the page is the whole life of the car, when it came, what it is, who holds it, every service and every accident and every transfer of custody, each line signed and dated by the keeper of the day. My own signature runs down 11 years of those pages. Before me it was a man named Fenwick, and before him a man named Oscar, and the book goes back further than any of us in a copperplate that no one now alive could match. I turned to the sovereign's page, and I read it as if I had never seen it, which is the only honest way to read a thing you think you already know. Petrol set the tea beside me and did not speak. Davech pulled up a stool and read over my shoulder, and between the three of us, over that long gray Tuesday afternoon, we built the case for a dead woman's car. The car had come to the Mews New the year of Prince Rowan's birth, entered by Fenwick in his careful hand. One saloon, dark green, chassis and engine numbers noted, coach built to order, and in the custody column 3 words that were the whole of the matter held, HRH personally, not the crown, not the household, not the king's fleet. Held by the Queen, personally in her own name, which meant that when she made her will the car was hers to give exactly as her rings and her books and her horse were hers to give, and it fell into her estate and not into the property of the crown that passes with the throne. There, said Davech, tapping the column with a black fingernail. Personally, old Fenwick knew what he was about. She paid for it out of her own settlement, see, not the civil list. I remember the fuss. There were those who thought a queen oughtn't own a car like a shopkeeper. She said, he almost smiled, she said a thing wasn't hers unless she could give it away, and she wanted it to be hers. I read on. The service history was flawless because I had made it so and Fenwick before me. Then 2 years back, the last entry before the cover went on. A single line in my own hand on the day of her death, formal, cold, the coldest line I have ever written, custody suspended pending estate. Held to the order of the executors of the estate of HRH the late Queen. And there it stopped. No transfer out, no release, no endorsement. The car had been sitting in a kind of legal amber for 2 years, and everyone had let it sit, and I had started to believe, foolishly, that everyone would go on letting it sit forever, because who would be so small as to fight over a dead woman's motor car? Executors, I said. Who are they? It should be here. I turned to the estate file Petrol had fetched, a fat folder of correspondence and inventory, and I went through it while the light went out of the yard and Petrol put the big lamps on. And here I hit the first wall, and I want to describe it carefully, because it was the moment I understood that the Queen Consort had not come to the garage on a whim that morning. She had come because she thought the ground had already been prepared under my feet. The estate had 3 executors named in the Queen's will. One was a bishop, long retired to the country, and I would learn in failing health. One was the Queen's own solicitor, a dry, meticulous man named Halbrook. And the third made me set down my tea. The third executor of the late Queen Isolde's estate was the king himself. I sat with that for a while. It is not a strange thing for a king to be executor of his late wife's estate. It is the most natural thing in the world. A man is trusted to see to his dead wife's wishes. But it meant that the estate that stood between Morwenna and the car was, in one of its 3 heads, her own husband. And a wife who has been 30 years in a house and knows how it ends for stubborn men, knows also how to work upon one tired old executor who happens to sleep in her bed. That was the ground she thought was prepared. Get the king, as executor, to sign the release. Then the transfer would be estate endorsed and lawful, and my log would have nothing to say, because I had staked everything on, the estate must sign. And here she would bring me the estate's signature and smile. She'll get the king to sign, I said aloud. Halbrook, the solicitor, was harder to reach than I expected. When I finally had him on the telephone the next morning, It took the whole authority of my office and a good deal of near lying to the household switchboard to get the number. He was cautious in the way of lawyers. And then, when he understood who I was and what I was calling about, he went quiet, and the quiet told me more than his words. "Sergeant Halloran," he said, "the motor detail, yes, I know the vehicle." A pause. "May I ask what has prompted your call?" I told him. I told him about the 4 black cars and the household authority signed on the wrong hand, and the instruction to hold the car sealed and untouched. I heard him breathing on the line, and then I heard him make a decision. "I am going to tell you something, Sergeant, and I am going to trust that a man who reads his logbook that closely is a man who can be trusted with it. 3 weeks ago I received a request, through the comptroller, Mr. Kren, for the executors to release a number of the late Queen's chattels, furniture, some pictures, and a motor car. The bishop is unwell and takes his lead from the others. And His Majesty," the solicitor chose his words like a man crossing a stream on stones, "His Majesty is tired and grieving still in his way, and disinclined to fight in his own house. He has, I believe, been given to understand that these releases are small housekeeping matters, tidyings up, that the car is a disused thing best passed to a young man who will drive it. He was on the point of signing. He may already have signed. I have been trying to slow the matter because it did not smell right to me, and now you have told me why." "Why?" I said. "Because," said Halbrook, "there is a document missing from the estate, Sergeant, and I have begun to think that someone does not want it found until after the car is gone." He would not say more on the telephone. Lawyers do not. But he asked me a question before he rang off, and it was the question that turned the whole matter from a garage dispute into something I would spend a fortnight of my life inside. "Tell me, Sergeant," he said, "in your fleet register, the physical book, is the vehicle recorded simply as held by the Queen personally? Or is there any note of a further instruction, a gift, a settlement, a wish as to where the car should go after her? Look carefully. And, Sergeant, look at the back of the page as well as the front." I told him I had read the page. He said mildly that reading and looking are not the same act, and rang off, and left me standing in the cold garage with the great gray book open in front of me, feeling like a man who has been shown that he cannot see his own hand. I looked again. I looked at the front of the Sovereign's page, all of it, and there was nothing new. And then, feeling foolish, I turned the leaf over and looked at the back, the reverse of the page, which in the fleet register is left blank, always a habit of the book, so that entries do not bleed through. And on the back of the Sovereign's page, in the bottom corner, in a hand I knew because I had studied it on 100 other documents, in the small, firm, upright hand of the late Queen Isolde herself, was written a single line and a date and her initials. "To be given on my death to the first of my grandchildren to reach their 16th year and pass the test for a license, that they may learn to drive it themselves as I did, not before, never sold. I.R." I sat down. I had to. The vetch came and read it over my shoulder and took off his cap, which I had never once seen him do inside the garage, and Petrol read it and said a word he should not have said in front of me, and I let it go. Because here it all was. Here was the whole reason the car mattered, and the whole reason a woman would send 4 cars to a mews to take it. The Sovereign was not a disused thing to be tidied away. It was a bequest, a specific, dated, initialed bequest, made by the Queen in her own hand, giving the car not to Lord Cassius, who was no grandchild of hers, who was Morwenna's son by a former marriage and no blood of Isolde's at all, but to the first of her true grandchildren to come of age to drive it. And the eldest of those grandchildren was Prince Torin, who was 11 years old, and who would not reach 16 for 5 years, and who therefore could not yet take the car, which meant that for 5 years the car must sit exactly where it sat, held, untouched, waiting for a boy to grow into it. 5 years. That was the window. That was the thing someone wanted done before the document surfaced. If Cassius took the car now, at his ease, and had the chauffeur trim ripped out and drove it about the county as a fashionable young lord's vintage saloon, then in 5 years' time, when a 16-year-old Prince Torin came looking for his grandmother's car, there would be nothing to give him but an apology and a story about how these things happen and no one quite recalls. The bequest would have been quietly strangled in its cradle, and the only people who would ever have known would be a dead queen, a dry solicitor, and a garage sergeant who could be moved on. That's why she said hold it sealed, I said slowly. She doesn't just want the car for Cassius. She wants it gone before the estate's properly settled, before the wills read out in full, before that line, I put my glove flat on the page, before anyone thinks to turn the page over. But it's written, Petrel said. It's right there in her own hand. How can they? Because it's written here, I said, in a garage logbook, a working record of a working garage, not in the will. Halbrook said a document was missing from the estate. I looked up at Vetch. The Queen wrote it here on the car's own page, the day she took delivery or thereabouts that dates from the first year. She wrote it where she thought it would always live, on the car itself, in the book that never leaves the mews. And then she'll have meant it copied into the will proper, formalized, made safe. And either it never was. Or it was, said Vetch, and the copy in the will has gone walking. That was the shape of it, somewhere between the Queen's own hand on the back of a logbook page and the settled, witnessed, unassailable will that a solicitor keeps in a strong room. The bequest of the car had thinned to a whisper. Perhaps a codicil had been drafted and never executed. Perhaps it had been executed and then removed. Perhaps it sat in a file in Halbrook's own office and he had not yet found it. I did not know. What I knew was that I was holding, in a working garage book, the only surviving witness in the Queen's own hand to what she had wanted done with her car, and that the moment anyone powerful realized the book said this, the book itself would become the next thing they came for. I want to tell you about the Queen, because you cannot understand why a man would sleep on a cot to guard her car unless you understand what she was, and the only way I know her is through the car and the mornings around it, which is a strange keyhole to know a queen through, but is the one I had. She came to the mews more than any royal person before or since. Most of them treat a garage the way they treat a kitchen, a place things come from, staffed by people whose faces they need not learn. The late Queen learned every face. She knew that Vetch's hands hurt in the cold and that Fenwick, my predecessor, had a daughter reading law, and she knew that I had come to the household from a regiment and had a way of standing that she once told me, laughing, made the young grooms nervous. She would come down early, before the house was properly awake, in a plain coat, and she would ask to take the sovereign out herself, and Fenwick and then I would check it over and hand her the keys, against every rule of how a queen is meant to travel, and she would drive out through the gates alone into the gray morning and come back an hour later with color in her face and the smell of the sea on her coat. A thing isn't yours unless you can give it away, she said to me once, the last spring of her life, standing by the open door of the car with one glove off, warming her bare hand on the engine cover the way she liked to. Everything else in this house belongs to the crown, Halloran. The rooms, the pictures, the very rings on my fingers, half of them, they're held in trust, they pass on, they were never truly mine. But this, she patted the green door, I bought this with my own settlement, against a good deal of advice, precisely so that once in my life I would own a thing outright, so that there would be one thing I could put where I wanted it when I'm gone, and no one could say me nay. She looked at me then, and I remember she was not smiling. You keep the log, Sergeant. When the time comes, you'll remember whose name is in the custody column, won't you? I told her I would. I did not know I was being given an instruction. I thought it was only a queen talking to a garage man in the early light, the way she did. It was, I understand now, the whole of my orders, given 2 years before I had to obey them, by a woman who saw further down the road than I did, who knew, perhaps, exactly what would come for the car once she was not standing beside it with one glove off, and who took the trouble to make sure that on the day it came, there would be a man in the yard who had already promised. That was the debt I was paying all that cold fortnight, not to a car. To a woman who had learned my face when she need not have, and who had told me in the plainest words that the one thing she had ever managed to truly own she meant a hand on herself, and had trusted a garage sergeant to see it done. When people ask why I did not simply let the powerful have their way, that is the answer, though it is too long for them and they stop listening halfway. Because she asked me in the spring light with one glove off, and I said I would. I did a thing then that I have been asked about many times since, and that I would do again without a breath of hesitation. I took the Master Fleet Register, the great gray book that never leaves the mews that had not left the mews in 100 years, and I photographed every line of the Sovereign's page, front and back, on my own telephone in the hard light of the big lamps, 3 times over. Then I telephoned Halbrook back and read him the words on the reverse of the page, and I heard the dry old lawyer go absolutely silent, and then I heard him say, very quietly, "Thank you, Sergeant. You have just found my missing document, or rather, you have found the one it was copied from. Do not let that book out of your sight." I did not intend to. The next morning the trouble came as I had known it would, but it did not come in the shape I expected. It did not come as Morwenna or Kren or 4 black cars. It came as a work order. Petrol found it in the terminal when he logged in, a household maintenance instruction, routed through the proper channel, stamped with the proper authority, scheduling the immediate collection of the Master Fleet Register for digitization and archival preservation. The book was to be taken to a records office in the city. A van would come at noon. The sergeant on duty was to release the register to the bearer against the attached authority and receive a temporary printed copy in its place. It was beautifully done. That is the thing I want understood. It was clever and lawful looking and utterly deadly. No one was taking the car. No one was breaking a seal. They were simply helpfully, kindly, taking the book away to preserve it, the book with the Queen's own hand on the back of one page, and I did not for one moment believe it would come back with that page intact. A digitization that lost one leaf, a scanning error, a page that wasn't in the original when we received it. Sergeant, see, here's the manifest. Only the front of each page was ever filled in. That's the standard. The back is always blank. And who would gainsay them? 100-year-old book, out of my hands, in the custody of a records office answering to the household. The Queen's grandchildren robbed of a car by a photocopier. Petrol looked up at me from the terminal, white to the lips. "Van's coming at noon, Sergeant. It's all in order. There's nothing wrong with it." "It's the household's book. They can send it for scanning, can't they? We can't refuse, "We can," I said. "And we're going to. Get me Halbrook and get me the estate seal and get me every scrap of paper in this mews with the Queen's hand on it. And Petrol," he stopped, half risen, "the book does not leave this garage today. Not to a van, not to a controller, not to the Queen herself. If they want the book, they can want it. Now move." The van came at noon exactly, which is how I knew it had been sent by people who wanted a record that showed everything done correctly and on time. It was plain and gray and had a records office crest on the door, and 2 men got out of it, one older and official with a clipboard, one younger who stayed by the vehicle, and the older man came across the yard with the confidence of a man carrying valid paper into a place where paper is obeyed. "Sergeant Halloran, collection of the Fleet Register for digitization. You'll have had the notice." He held out the authority. It was, as Petrol had said, all in order, rooted, stamped, sealed with the household seal, everything a working sergeant is trained to obey. "If you'll fetch the book, I'll sign for it and give you your temporary copy and we'll be out of your mourning." I did not fetch the book. I stood on my line of floor with the great gray register on the bench behind me, closed, my glove resting on its cover, and I looked at the man's clipboard and I said, "I can't release the register." He blinked. He had not been sent for a fight, he had been sent for a book. "Sergeant, I have a valid authority. The register is household property scheduled for preservation. There's nothing to refuse. It's a routine. The register isn't only household property, I said. It's evidence in an open estate, the estate of the late Queen Isolde. And there's a bequest recorded in that book, in the late Queen's own hand, that's now the subject of a question before her executors. I've had that from the executor's solicitor this morning, in writing. I held up Halbrook's fax, which had come through an hour before and which I had never in my life been so glad to hold, instructing that the register be preserved in place, at the mews, unaltered, and released to no one but an executor in person or an officer of the court. Your authorities from the household. The household isn't an executor of the estate. So your paper, sir, like the last paper these people brought me, is signed on the wrong hand. The man looked at Halbrook's fax. He was not a bad man, I want to say that. He was a records officer with a job to do and a valid-looking order, and I watched him read a solicitor's letter that said, in effect, that if he took this book he might be interfering with a dead queen's estate, and I watched him decide that no digitization on earth was worth that. He lowered his clipboard. "You'll give me that in writing," he said, "that you've refused and why." "Gladly, and you'll give me it in writing that you asked and that I showed you the solicitor's instruction. Petrol, 2 copies, both signed, both dated, one for each of us. Because that is how you win with paper in the end, not by hiding it, by making so much of it so correctly that the people who deal in false paper cannot move for the weight of the true." The van went away empty. But before it went, the older records man paused at his door and looked back at the garage and said a thing I turned over for days afterward. "You know they'll come at it another way, Sergeant. A book's only a book. What's written can be unwritten if enough people agree to say it was never there." He was not threatening me. I think he was warning me. Whatever's on that page, get it off the page. Get it somewhere a household can't reach. That's a free word from a man who's carried a lot of books to a lot of vans. Then he got in and drove off, and I stood there understanding that even the errand boys of the powerful could see more clearly than I had what I was truly up against. Petrol watched the van out of the gates, and then turned to me with a look I will not forget. Half a boy's relief and half a soldier's dawning understanding of what a chain of small correct acts can be made to hold up. "That's twice," he said. "You've refused them twice. Sergeant, they're not going to stop." "No," I said. "They're going to stop coming through the letterbox and start coming through the front door, which is what I want." I closed the register and locked it in the estate cabinet and hung the key on the chain under my tunic where it would stay until this was done. As long as they send vans and controllers, it's my word against their paper, and one day their paper's better than mine and I lose the book in the night. I don't want to fight vans. I want to fight in the open in front of people who can settle it for good. I want the family in this yard. I want the estate in this yard. I want that line on the back of the page read out loud where no one can lose it. Let them come with all their weight. The heavier they come, the harder the truth lands under them. I believed that when I said it. I want to be honest that in the days that followed, there were hours when I did not believe it at all. I took the records man's free word, though. That very night, after the yard had emptied and the 2 watchful strangers had gone off shift, I did a careful thing. I did not trust only my telephone, which a household can order surrendered, and I did not trust only the fax, which is a curl of paper that fades. I sat at the bench under the big lamp with the great gray book open to the sovereign's page, and I made by hand in ink on a state letterhead I had every right to use, a true and attested copy of the words on the back of that page. The full line, the date, the initials, and beneath it I wrote a plain statement of where the original was to be found and how I had come to read it, and I signed it and dated it, and then I did the thing that mattered. I did not keep it. I sent it. I sent 1 copy to Halbrook the solicitor by registered post first thing, to be lodged with the estate papers where a household could not touch it. I sent a second to Dovech to keep at his own home, 3 streets from the mews, in a biscuit tin under his stairs, because no controller in the kingdom would ever think to raid an old mechanic's biscuit tin. and the third I carried on my own person, folded small, inside the crown of my cap, where it stayed for the rest of that fortnight and grew soft at the creases from the warmth of my own head. I tell this part slowly because it is the part people skip when they tell the story back to me, and it is the part that actually won it. They like the morning with the king in the yard. They like the codicil read out loud. But the king in the yard was only possible because a page could not be quietly lost, and the page could not be quietly lost because a garage sergeant had understood, from a warning muttered by a records van driver, that the only defense against people who deal in vanishing paper is to make the true paper multiply faster than they can make it disappear. 3 copies in 3 places by 3 hands. That is not glamorous. That is not the moment anyone paints. But it is the whole reason there was a moment to paint at all. A thing that exists in one place can be taken. A thing that exists in 4 places, in 4 hands, in 4 houses, is not a thing anymore. It is a fact, and you cannot send a van for a fact. I slept better the night the copies were out, for exactly 1 night. Then the pressure changed shape and grew clever and grew personal. First came a letter from the household, courteous and cold, noting that the sergeant of the motor detail had twice obstructed lawful household instructions, that his conduct was under review, and that he would confine himself to the mechanical duties of his post pending that review. It was signed by Kren. It did not order me to release the car. They had learned that much, but it fenced me smaller, and it put the word review in front of a man with 11 years and a pension and no other trade. Then the mews itself began to close around me. A rota change I had not asked for moved de vetch to the far garage, and put 2 men I did not know on my shifts, quiet men who watched the estate cabinet more than they watched their work. The terminal, which I had never much used, was suddenly the only sanctioned record, and a note appeared instructing that the temporary digital register was now the master and the old book was to be treated as decommissioned. They were trying to demote the book, to make it, on paper, not the record but a relic, so that when the day came they could say the true register was the terminal, and the terminal, of course, had only the fronts of the pages, cleanly scanned, the backs blank as the standard required. And then they touched the terminal, and I caught it, and catching it told me at last exactly who I was fighting and how far they had planned this. It was de vetch who saw it first, before the rota moved him to the far garage. His eyes were old, but his instinct for a wrong entry was older than mine. He called me over to the screen one evening with his cap pushed back and a frown that meant trouble. "Idris, look at the sovereign's record on the terminal. Look at the custody column. Read it out to me." I read it, and I felt the floor drop because it did not say what the book said. On the screen, in the digitized master that the household had just declared the true register, the sovereign's custody line no longer read held, HRH personally. It read held, household fleet crown property. Someone had gone into the terminal and changed one line quietly in the last few days, and turned the Queen's own car, the one thing she had bought precisely so it would be hers and not the crown's, into ordinary crown property that passes with the throne and belongs, in effect, to whoever wears the crown, which was now, since the king had a consort at his side, a thing Morwenna could reach. Change that one word personally to fleet, and the whole legal ground I stood on dissolved. If the car was crown property, then it had never been in the estate at all, and the codicil was worthless, and there was nothing for an executor to sign or refuse, and Cassius could have it tomorrow. "They're not just going to lose the page," I said slowly. "They're going to change the record so the page never mattered. Make the terminal say the car was always crown property, decommission the book, and if anyone waves the Queen's handwriting at them they say, sadly, the old record was in error, see, the corrected digital master. The car was always household fleet. The poor sergeant misread an ancient book." "Can they do that?" De vetch's voice was very low. "Just type over her." "They can type over her," I said. "They can't type over the book. That's why the book had to go for scanning, and that's why I couldn't let it. As long as the original exists in her own hand in ink, a typed line is only a typed line. But if the book's gone and the only record left is one they can edit, I did not finish it. I did not need to. We both looked at the screen, at the 4 typed words that had quietly stolen a queen's car, and I understood that I had been closer to losing than I knew, and that the fortnight was not a squabble over a car but a straight contest between a thing written in a dead woman's hand and a thing that could be rewritten by a living one's servants, and that everything, turned on which record the world would finally be made to believe. I did the only thing I could. I found the edit. A terminal keeps a history, a log of its own, of who changed what and when. Most people forget that, or trust that no one will look, and the people who had changed that line had trusted exactly that. But I keep records the way some men keep faith, and I went down into the terminal's own history with de Vetch reading over my shoulder, and there it was. The custody line altered at 11 minutes past 9 on an evening the week before, from a login belonging to the household controller's office. Kren's office. I photographed the screen, the changed line and the edit history both, the before and the after, and the time and the login, and I printed it twice, and I added it to the copies going out to Halbrook and to the biscuit tin under de Vetch's stairs. Because now I did not only have the Queen's hand saying the car was hers. I had the household's own machine confessing, in its own log, the exact minute someone in the controller's office had tried to say it wasn't. The forgers had left their fingerprints on the very tool they forged with. You've got them, de Vetch breathed. That's not a servant being difficult over a car. That's someone faking the record of a royal estate. That's why they'll fight so much harder now, I said. A man will do a great deal to keep from being the one who changed the line at 9/11 on a Tuesday. We've stopped being an obstacle they'd like removed. We've become a thing they can't afford to leave standing. I locked the printout away with the rest. Which means they'll come for me properly now. And good. Let them. Every blow they throw is another witness that the car was worth stealing. And a thing worth stealing was never a disused old car. And a disused old car was their whole story. I looked at him. They've just talked themselves out of the only defense they had. Then the thing spread past the mews walls, which frightened me more than any road of change. Because a fight kept inside a garage is a fight you can win with a logbook. And a fight that gets into the wider world is a fight that gets decided by whoever tells the story loudest. It began as a whisper and then it was in a column. Not my name, they were too careful for that, but the shape of it. An item in one of the gossip pages about tensions below stairs at Harrogate. A difficult member of the domestic staff obstructing the family's private arrangements. A disgruntled long-serving man who was refusing to cooperate with the household's wishes. It was Morwenna's countermove, and it was a good one. She could not make my refusal illegitimate, so she set out to make it look like the sulk of a stubborn servant who had got above himself. A man clinging to a dead queen's belongings out of some unhealthy sentiment, standing in the way of a grieving family trying to move on. Turned that way, in that light, he wouldn't release a disused old car. Sounds less like duty and more like a small man's spite. And once it is in a column, it is a thing people are saying. And once it is a thing people are saying, a household can act against you and call it responding to concern. De Vetch showed me the column over the compressor, his blunt finger under the line, and I felt the ground tilt in a new direction. They're building a reason to sack you that isn't the real reason, he said flatly. Sentimental, difficult, obstructive. Then one morning it's in light of concerns about conduct and out you go, and the car goes the week after and it's all been about a bad-tempered garage man the whole time. Nobody has to lose a page, they just have to lose you. He was right, and for a day it nearly beat me, because there is no logbook entry that answers a whisper. You cannot photograph your way out of people are saying. I sat with that as heavily as I sat with anything that fortnight. And then I understood the answer, and it was the same answer as always, only turned around. If they meant to win by telling the story their way in the shadows, then I would win by making the true story impossible to tell any way but straight in the light in front of the only people whose telling counted. Not the columns, the family, the estate, the king. Get it into that yard in the open, with the codicil read aloud, and no gossip column on earth could turn. He guarded a dead queen's bequest to her grandson, into a difficult servant made a fuss. The truth does not need better publicity than a lie. It needs a room where it cannot be talked over. I resolved to build that room, and everything I did from that hour was toward getting the right people standing in it. Then they tried to buy me, which I had not expected, and which taught me more about how frightened they truly were than any threat had. It came through Lord Cassius himself. He drove into the mews one afternoon in a borrowed sports car, alone, all easy charm, and found me at the bench and leaned on the doorframe of my own garage as if he owned the light coming through it. "Sergeant," he said, "Halloran, we've got off on the wrong foot, you and I don't like a bad footing. I'm not a monster, whatever the old solicitor thinks. I like cars. I love cars. That green sovereign, I'd cherish it. I'd keep it exactly as it is. Honestly, the coach line, all of it. Better than it rotting under a cover for 5 years waiting for a schoolboy who will want something with a screen in the dashboard by the time he's old enough." He smiled and produced from inside his jacket a folded cheque and laid it on the bench beside the great gray book without looking at either. "And I look after the men who look after me. A keeper who saw his way clear to an amicable transfer, a keeper like that could name his post, his pension, his retirement. I'm told you family. Everyone's got someone. The world could be kinder too." I did not touch the cheque. I did not look at the number, and I have wondered since whether that was strength or cowardice, because I think if I had looked at the number I might have been angrier than I could safely afford to be. "My lord," I said, "do you know what's written on the back of that car's page, in your step-grandmother's own hand?" He did not. I saw at once. His face told me he did not. He was here on his mother's errand and had never been shown the reason, only the reward. "It says the car goes to the first of the late Queen's grandchildren old enough to learn to drive. You're not one of them, my lord. Not by blood, not by her word, not by the will. This isn't a keeper being difficult about an amicable transfer. This is a keeper telling you that the thing you've been sent to charm out of me was never on offer from anyone because it isn't ours to move. Not mine. Not yours. Not the Queen's. Take your cheque. And if you love cars as you say, and I half believe you do, then be a man who'd rather see one kept honestly for a boy than remade fashionably for himself. That's the only trade I'll make with you, my lord, and it costs you nothing but the wanting." He looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind the charm that I could not name. I have thought since it might have been shame, or the memory of shame, from whatever childhood makes a man reach so easily for a cheque. Then he took the folded paper back off the bench and turned it in his fingers and said, more quietly than he had said anything, "You'd have made a poor courtier, Sergeant." And he drove off, and I never afterward knew for certain which side of it he came down on, only that he did not come again, and that when the reckoning came in the yard he stood at the back of it and said nothing and did not meet my eye. And a man who says nothing when his mother is losing is not, perhaps, entirely his mother's. But the household did not send only charm. When the cheque failed, the review letters grew teeth, and then they came for the boy. Not Torin, I mean petrol. On the 4th day he came to me gray-faced with a letter of his own. A transfer, effective immediately, to a garrison motor pool 3 counties off. A promotion in grade dressed up to look like a kindness, signed by a hand that had never met him. He was 23, and he had a mother he sent money to and a career in front of him that a Queen Consort could end with a sentence. And he stood in front of me holding that letter, and I watched him understand that the price of what we were doing was going to be paid partly by him. And I felt something in me that I had not felt since I was a young man, which was the pure cold anger of watching the powerful reach past the one they cannot move to break the ones they can. "Take it," I told him. He stared at me. "Sergeant." Take the transfer. It's a good post and it's out of the fire, and I'll not have you burned for standing next to me. You've done your part. You found the work order. You signed the refusals. You're a witness now to everything that happened in this yard, and no transfer 3 counties off can unwitness it. Go. Do the job well. And keep the copies I gave you somewhere they'll never think to look. And if I ever send you a single word asking for them, you send them by the fastest hand in the kingdom, and you ask no questions. That's the whole of what I need from you now. The rest I'll carry. He did not want to take it. In the end he took it because I made it an order, and because he was young enough to still believe that a man in my position knew what he was doing. I was not at all sure I did. When his boots had gone out of the yard for the last time, and it was only me and the 2 watchful strangers and the sealed door of Bay 4 and the locked book, I stood in the emptied garage in the failing light and felt, for the first time, genuinely alone in it, and genuinely afraid, not of Morwenna, but of losing. Of being ground down slow and lawful and quiet until one gray morning, the book went for scanning while I was elsewhere, and came back with a blank page and a manifest that swore it had always been blank. That was the false dawn, or rather the false dusk, the low point where the reasonable, ruinous middle course whispered loudest, "Let the book go. Let them scan it. Keep the photographs, keep the facts, keep your pension, keep your post. You've made your record. You can't hold a 100-year-old book against the whole weight of a household with your bare hands. Be sensible, be quiet, live to fight another day that will never come." I sat with that voice a long time that night in the dark garage, with my glove on the cover of the locked cabinet. And then I did the one thing that turned it. I went to the king. Not directly. A garage sergeant does not walk in on his monarch. But a garage sergeant who has kept a household's cars for 11 years knows the men who drive its people. And among them was one I trusted, an old chauffeur named Marsh, who had driven the king for 30 years and the late queen before that, and who had loved the queen in the wordless loyal way that men of his trade love the people they carry safely through a life. I went to Marsh, and I told him the whole of it, and I showed him the photograph of the line on the back of the page, and I watched the oldest driver in the household read a dead woman's hand and go very still. "He doesn't know," Marsh said at last. "The king. He signed the release, Idris, 3 days ago." I drove Kren to him myself with the folder, and I saw him sign it, tired at the end of a long day, the comptroller saying it was small things, tidyings, the disused green car to young Cassius who'd make use of it. He signed it thinking he was doing a kindness. He does not know his wife wrote that on the back of the page. He does not know Torrens to have it. The old man folded the photograph shut as if it were hot. He is an executor of her estate, Idris. He has signed away a thing she left in trust for her own grandchild, and he does not know it, and the woman who put the folder under his pen knows it very well. "Then he has to be told," I said, "by someone he can't accuse of scheming, not me, not Kren, not the household. It has to be the estate's own hand, the solicitor, with the king as executor, not the king as her husband. He has to see the words as the man his wife trusted to carry out her will, before he sees them as a man defending a purchase to his wife." Marsh looked at me a long moment. "You want me to carry a lawyer to the king behind the Queen Consort's back? I want you to carry the truth to an executor about the estate he's executing," I said. "That's not a plot, Marsh. That's the job, hers and yours and mine. We're all 3 of us just trying to do what she wanted done, and the only people scheming here are the ones who lost the page on purpose." It took 2 days to arrange, and they were the longest 2 days of my service, because I no longer knew from 1 hour to the next whether the book would still be in the cabinet when I next unlocked it. I slept in the garage. I actually slept in the garage, on a cot behind the estate cabinet, with the key on its chain under my shirt, and the 2 watchful strangers said nothing, and I said nothing, and we all understood what the cot meant. I want to set down what those 2 nights were, because they were the truest part of the whole business, and no one paints them either. There is a particular loneliness to guarding a thing at night when everyone with power over your life would rather you failed. The mews at 3 in the morning is a large cold place, all echo and dark bays and the small tick of metal cooling that never quite stops, and I lay on that cot with my eyes open and ran through, over and over, everything that could still go wrong. That the king would not come, that Marsh would lose his nerve, or be turned away, or that Morwenna would get to her husband first, and have the whole thing waved off as a servant's fancy before it ever reached the yard. That some clerk would produce a new paper cleverer than the last. That I would simply be dismissed in the night, walked off the premises by 2 quiet men, and the book left behind me to whatever came for it. I am not a fanciful man, but I lay in that dark and felt the whole weight of a household leaning on one cot, one book, one page, one word in a custody column, and I understood for the first time in my life why some men, tested this way, simply open the door and hand the thing over and go home to sleep. It would have been so easy. That is the part they never tell you about doing the right thing. Not that it is hard, but that it is easy not to at 3 in the morning, when no one is watching and the reward for surrender is a warm bed and a kept pension. On the second night, a man tried the side door. I heard him before I saw anything, the small wrong sound of a handle turned slowly by someone who does not want to be heard, which is a sound that carries in a silent garage better than a shout. I was up off the cot before I had decided to be, and I crossed the dark floor without a light, and I stood just inside the side door with the big hand lamp unlit in my fist, and I waited. The handle turned all the way and the door eased inward an inch on the cold night, and a shape leaned into the gap. And I switched on the lamp full in his face. I never saw who it was. He had a scarf up and a cap down and the light blinded us both, but I saw him freeze and I said quite quietly, "The book's not here," which was a lie. It was 6 feet behind me in the cabinet, but it was the right lie, and I said, "And I am. And I'll be here tomorrow night and the night after. You can tell whoever sent you that the keeper sleeps on the floor now." And the shape withdrew, and the door closed, and I heard footsteps go quickly away across the cobbles, and I stood there with my heart going hard and the lamp shaking just slightly in my hand, and I thought, good. Let them go back and report that. Let them tell her a man is sleeping across the door. There is nothing that unnerves a schemer like a fool who will not be reasonable, because a schemer only knows how to move people who can be moved, and a man on a cot who has stopped being movable is a problem no clever paper can solve. I did not sleep again that night. I did not need to. I had frightened them a little, and it warmed me better than sleep. And then on the third morning, everything I had wanted and half dreaded arrived at once, because the powerful, when they finally come through the front door, come all the way through it. They came in the same 4 black cars, but this time the yard was not empty to receive them. Halbrook the solicitor had come at first light in a modest saloon of his own, dry and gray and carrying a locked case, and with him, and this was Marsh's doing, and I will thank the old man for it in whatever comes after this life, came the king. King Alaric himself in the flesh in the mews, which no reigning monarch had entered in living memory, standing on my cobbles in a plain dark coat looking older than his portraits and steadier than I had feared, with Princess Adela his sister beside him, straight-backed and sharp-eyed. The one member of that family everyone in the household privately went to when they wanted a thing done and done squarely. And behind them, drawn by the gathering the way weather is drawn to a coast, came Crown Prince Rowan, the late Queen's son, grave and quiet, and his own son with him, Prince Torin, 11 years old in a school coat, not understanding yet why he had been brought to a garage, only knowing that the grown-ups were arranged the way grown-ups arrange themselves when something is about to be decided. And then Morwenna's cars swept in and stopped short, because the yard was full, and she stepped out into a scene she had not written, and I saw her take it in at a glance. The king, the solicitor, Adela, Rowan, the boy, and I saw her understand that the thing she had built to be done quietly in a garage was about to be done loudly in front of everyone she least wanted watching. And I will give her this. She did not falter. She came across the cobbles as if she had summoned the gathering herself. "Alaric," she said, going straight to the king, warm, taking his arm. "You shouldn't be out in this cold. What is all this? Kren tells me the garage staff have been obstructing the simplest housekeeping. I've had to bring cars 3 times. A little laugh for the audience. "Come inside, it's nothing, it's a man being difficult over a disused car." "Let him be difficult," said Princess Adela, before the king could answer, in a voice like a door closing. "I should like to hear what a man's willing to lose his post being difficult over. It's usually worth hearing. Sergeant." Every face in that yard turned to me. The king's, tired and searching. Rowan's, guarded. The boys, wide. Morwenna's, still smiling, with winter under it. And I stood on my line of floor where the polished garage met the cold cobbles, in the post I had held for 11 years and might not hold by nightfall. And I did the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is to tell the truth in the right order and let it stand on its own legs. "Your Majesty," I said to the king, and only to the king, 2 years ago I entered the late Queen Isolde's motorcar in the Fleet Register as held to the order of her executors, of whom you are one. 9 days ago I was instructed by the household to release that car to Lord Cassius. I refused because a household instruction can't move an estate-held car. Only the estate can, through its executors, with the transfer signed and the log endorsed. I was right to refuse, and I'd refuse again. But that's not why I've asked the estate's solicitor and your Majesty here today. I've asked you here because of what's written on the back of the car's page, in the late Queen's own hand. And I believe, sir, that when you signed the release 3 days ago, you had not seen it." The king's face changed. "The back of the page," he said slowly. "Mr. Halbrook," I said, "if you would." The dry old solicitor stepped forward, and he did not read from a copy or a photograph. He had done better than that. He had come armed for exactly this. From his locked case he drew out the Master Fleet Register itself. No, I misspeak, he could not. The book was in my cabinet. What he drew out was the thing that made the book unnecessary. He drew out a codicil. A single sheet, executed, signed, witnessed, dated, that he had found in his own strong room in a misfiled bundle after my telephone call sent him hunting. The formal legal twin of the line on the back of the page. The copy the Queen had made and made safe exactly as I had guessed. The document that had gone missing not because it never existed, but because someone had prayed it never would surface in time. "This is a codicil to the will of Her late Majesty Queen Isolde," Halbrook said, into a yard gone utterly silent, "executed in her own hand, witnessed and dated, and it is unambiguous. I shall read the operative clause. My motorcar, the dark green Sovereign Saloon, held in my own name, I give to the first of my grandchildren to attain their 16th year and to pass the test for a license to drive, that they may learn to drive it as I did. It is not to be sold, not to be given elsewhere, and not to be released from the mews before that day." He lowered the sheet. "The car is not the household's to give, sir. It is not Lord Cassius's to receive. Lord Cassius is not a grandchild of the late Queen. It is held by her express and lawful instruction for the eldest of her grandchildren." He looked once at the boy in the school coat. "That is His Royal Highness Prince Torin, who is 11. The car waits 5 years. It was always meant to wait 5 years, and any release of it before then by any authority is void." For a moment no one moved. Then the king put out his hand, and Halbrook gave him the codicil, and the old man read it himself, standing there in the cold with his reading glasses trembling a little on his nose, read his dead wife's hand giving her car to their grandson, and I watched 2 years of grief and 3 days of being quietly used move across a monarch's face in front of everyone, and I looked away, because some things a man should be allowed to feel without a garage full of witnesses, even when the witnesses are the point. When he looked up, he did not look at me. He looked at Morwenna, and it was the quietest I ever heard that yard. "You knew," he said, "it was not a question. Kren brought me the folder and called it housekeeping, a disused car, small things to be tidied." You stood beside me while I signed it. He was not shouting. That was the terrible part. He never once raised his voice. You knew Isolde had left it to Torin, and you tried to have it out of the mews and remade for your son before her will was ever read out. And when the sergeant would not open the door, you sent for the book to be scanned so the page could be lost. The codicil shook once in his hand and went still. You would have taken a car, a dead woman left her grandchild to learn to drive on, and you would have done it as a tidying. Alaric, she began. Alaric, I never saw any codicil, I. Then hear the rest, said Halbrook, and his dry voice had gone hard as a courtroom. Sergeant Halloran, will you show His Majesty what was done to the record last week? I brought out the printout, the terminal's own history. The custody line changed from personally to Crown Fleet at 11 minutes past 9, the login stamped from the controller's office, and I laid it in the king's hands, and Halbrook read it aloud, flat and merciless, the date and the minute and the source. Someone in your Majesty's household altered the electronic record of the estate's own property to make this car appear crown property that had never been the late Queen's to bequeath. That is not housekeeping, sir. Interfering with the record of an estate under administration is a serious matter, and it was done a week ago from a known office, and the machine kept the account of it whether they wished it or not. The sergeant found it. Had he not had that book gone to a records van, and that line stood on the terminal unchallenged, the late Queen's own hand would today be dismissed as an old man's misreading of an antique book, and her grandson would have nothing. He let the paper hang in the silence. The car was stolen twice over, sir, once from the boy and once from the truth. The king read the printout for a long time. When he lowered it, his face had changed again, and this time what was in it was not grief, but something colder and older, the thing that lives under a tired man when you finally reach the king in him. Do not, he said to Morwenna, 2 words. He handed the codicil back to Halbrook as if he could no longer bear the weight of it. I am an executor of that estate. I nearly failed it in my own house because I was tired and I trusted the folder that was put under my pen. I will not fail it again. He turned at last and he looked at me and I came to attention on my line. Sergeant Halloran, you refused a written authority of my household. Twice. 3 times. Yes, your Majesty. On the grounds that it was signed on the wrong hand. Yes, sir. And you were right, and every man above you was wrong, and you knew it would cost you your post, and you did it anyway, and you slept on a cot in a cold garage for a week to keep a book safe for a boy who doesn't yet know how to drive. He was silent a moment. There is a word for a man who guards a thing entrusted to him against everyone, including the powerful, including his own comfort, including me. The word is not obstinate, whatever my household wrote in its letters. The word is faithful. He looked round the yard, at Adela, at Rowan, at the boy. See that it's the word that goes in his file, and strike the review. And bring me the man Kren, and the household clerk who scheduled a 100-year-old book for a records van, because I should like to understand who taught them to lose a page. Kren was gone from the household within the week. I never saw the gray suit again. There was talk, quiet and careful, of whether the altering of an estate's record ought to go further than a dismissal. Halbrook, I know, wrote a long dry letter about it. But the family closed around the matter the way great families do, and in the end the punishment was to be turned out and to be known, among the small number who knew anything, as the man who tried to forge a Queen's car away from a child and was caught by a garage sergeant. For a man like Kren, whose whole self was the trust the powerful placed in him, I do not think a court could have found a heavier sentence than that. The first thing Princess Adela did before she did anything else was to have the terminal record corrected in front of a witness. The custody line typed back to what the Queen had made it held, HRH personally, and beneath it a new line noting the correction, the date, and by whose authority, so that no one could ever again quietly type over a dead woman. The machine will remember the truth now, she told me, the same as your book does. 2 records that agree and both of them witnessed. Let them try their 9/11 again. She was, I think, the only one of them who fully understood from the first minute in that yard that the whole war had been fought over a single word in a custody column, and that the word had held. The transfer that had sent Petrol 3 counties off was reversed by Princess Adela personally, who I later learned had gone through the household movement orders of that fortnight with the cold thoroughness of a woman who has watched her family used before, and had found more than one boy shifted quietly out of the way of things, and had brought them all back. The two watchful strangers left my mews, and de Vetch came back from the far garage, and we said nothing about any of it, which is how men of the trade say everything. As for Morwenna, the crown does not throw out a Queen Consort over a motor car, and it did not. But something was broken in that yard that morning that did not mend, and everyone who was there knew it, and she knew it best of all. She had come 3 times with all her weight, through the letterbox and then through the front door, and each time the weight had landed on the truth and the truth had held, and she had done it in the end in front of her husband and his sister, and the son of the woman she had tried to rob. She left the mews that morning before the king did, alone in one car, and she did not look at the sealed door of Bay 4 as she passed it, and I have always thought that was because she could not. The king stayed a while after she had gone. He asked to see the book, and I unlocked the estate cabinet and laid the great gray register open on the bench, and I turned the sovereign's page over and showed him the line on the back, his wife's small, firm, upright hand, to be given on my death to the first of my grandchildren. I.R., and he stood over it with his gloves off and touched the initials once, the way I had touched the door of the bay 2 years before, and I understood that we had both of us been keeping the same promise to the same woman, only he had forgotten for 3 days that he was keeping it, and I had not been allowed to forget for a single Tuesday. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He called the boy over, Prince Torin, still in his school coat, still not sure why he was in a garage, and he had me raise the fitted cover from Bay 4, the cover I had been forbidden to so much as lift, and there it stood in the lamplight, the long dark green sovereign with its coach line the width of a coin, and the king put his hand on his grandson's shoulder and said, "This was your grandmother's. She drove it herself out along the coast with the window down. She left it to you, the first of you to grow old enough to learn. It's yours in 5 years and not a day before, and this man," his hand tightened just slightly, "this man kept the whole weight of my house off it so that it would be here for you. When you're 16 and you pass your test, you come to this garage, and you ask for Sergeant Halloran, and if he's still here he'll teach you to drive it, and if he's not, you'll find whoever holds his keys and you'll tell them the king said the boy is to learn on his grandmother's car. Do you understand?" The boy looked at the car, and at his grandfather and at me, and he did not say anything clever, because he was 11 and it was too large a morning for cleverness. He just nodded and reached out, and laid his own small hand flat on the deep green door, exactly where 100 other hands had not been allowed, and I felt something in my chest let go that had been held tight since the Tuesday the black cars came. They lowered the cover again before they left, the king himself steadying one corner of it, and I locked the bay, and the yard emptied of monarchs and lawyers and princes until it was only me and de Vetch and the tick of a car that had not run that day and did not need to, because it was not waiting to be driven now. It was waiting for a boy. There is a great difference between the two, and it is the difference the whole fight had been about. A word about the book, since it was the third character in the whole affair and deserves its ending too. After that morning the king gave an order that the Master Fleet Register was never again to leave the mews for any purpose, digitization or preservation or anything else, and that if the household wished it scanned, the scanner would come to the book and not the book to the scanner, and that every page would be recorded front and back, the backs especially, in the presence of the keeper. It is a small, dry administrative instruction, and I have it framed on the wall of my little office, because it is the closest thing to a medal a man in my trade is ever likely to get, and because it means that whatever comes after me, No one will ever again be able to lose a page of that book and call it standard. The Queen's line is safe now. It has been photographed and codiciled and framed instructioned into permanence. She wrote 4 dozen words on the back of a page in the first year of a car's life, and they held against a queen 30 years in power, and they will outlast every one of us. That is what writing a true thing down and putting it where it belongs can do. It is the only real magic I have ever seen. I served 4 more years at that post. I mean to serve the 5th. Prince Torin turned 16 in the spring after next, and he has already been to the mews twice on his own account, awkward and growing, to sit in the driver's seat with the engine off and put his hands on the wheel and ask me what the pedals do, and I tell him. And I tell him also every time that his grandmother drove this road and that one, and used to take one glove off, and never let anyone say a thing was hers unless she could give it away. He listens. He is a good boy. He will be a careful driver. The last time he came, he was quiet a while in the driver's seat, and then he asked me, not looking at me, looking through the windscreen at the closed bay door, whether it was true that a lady had once wanted to give the car to someone else, and whether I had stopped it. I told him the truth, which is that no one had wanted to give the car to anyone. Someone had wanted to take it, which is a different thing, and that I had not stopped it alone, that a solicitor and a chauffeur and an old mechanic and his own grandfather, the king, had all stood in the yard, and that all any of us had really done was refuse to let a written thing be turned into an unwritten one. He thought about that. Then he said, "But you were first." And I did not answer him, because there is no becoming answer a man can give to that, but I will not pretend it did not sit warm in me the whole rest of that day. People ask me, when they hear the story, whether I was not afraid, a garage sergeant, standing against a queen and a controller and a household over a car. And I tell them the truth, which is that I was afraid the whole time, on the cot in the dark and at the side door at 3 in the morning, and every hour I did not know if the book would still be in the cabinet. But fear was never the question. The question was only ever which hand had signed, and whether I would read the log or look away from it. A queen gave me an order in a cold yard, and I did not disobey her because I was brave. I disobeyed her because the car was not hers to give, and I had a page in a book in a dead woman's own hand that said so, and a man who keeps the keys keeps them for everyone, or he keeps them for no one. I kept them for the boy. I would keep them for the boy again. That is the whole of it, and it is enough.